So I figured I'd start us off, if you flip to the next slide, with a quick agenda of what we're going to cover today. So we're going to start with just a quick introduction to Kubecost, and then we're going to dig right into, why we've developed this new feature called Kubecost Collections and what it is. But the majority of our time today will be spent giving you all a really deep dive demo into what is Kubecost Collections and how you can use it in your organization to drive, better visibility into your teams or application or business unit spend. I'll also highlight, what else we have on our product roadmap for this feature, and then we'll wrap up with a brief Q&A. So yeah, digging right in on the next slide, a little bit about Kubecost. So we started back in 2019 as an open source tool to give developers visibility into their Kubernetes spend. And today we've grown to empower thousands of teams across companies of all sizes to help them, monitor and reduce waste while balancing performance and reliability against cost. So, whether you're on AWS, Azure, GCP, or even running Kubernetes on premises, Kubecost is able to give you a single pane of glass into all of your spend and help you make educated business decisions. We're currently managing over $3 billion in cloud spend, and have leading companies like Adobe, Audi, Johnson & Johnson, using Kubecost to help untangle their cloud bills and also optimize their infrastructure and ultimately hold their teams accountable to the Kubernetes and cloud spend that they're consuming. We have over 75 Kubernetes and FinOps certified experts across the globe, and so we're excited to work with teams and help them, take the next step in their journey. So let's dive right into, Kubecost Collections. Yeah, so some of the problems we saw that contributed to us developing this feature. So number one, teams are looking for, the ability to create a single report for their total spend for a given application, team, department, or some business unit. I want to get all the costs together in a single report for some business unit. And that can be really challenging today, right? The existing approach is largely based on, labeling strategies in your software and in the cloud resources. And oftentimes those labels can be difficult to organize and maintain as your organizations grow or change. It can be considerable overhead. And finally, disentangling, your Kubernetes and your cloud costs can be an enormous challenge, right? You may, it's oftentimes difficult for teams to go all the way down to the container level and understand their Kubernetes spend, and then also relate that back to, the cloud assets. And this is exactly where Kubecost Collections comes into play. So what is Kubecost Collections? Kubecost Collections enables teams to, as I was saying, create a single report with both their Kubernetes and their cloud costs. And really the use case here is a lot of teams are able to now use this to do chargeback or showback very, very easily. And, it's also giving teams total flexibility in how they add costs to this collection or group. So you can add anything from like a specific pod to a custom label, again, across Kubernetes or cloud. And then Kubecost is the real magic here. We're going to be able to automatically deduct any overlapping costs. So maybe you've added like a full cluster, and then you also add some workload, which is also deployed on that cluster. We will detect any duplicate or overlapping costs and deduct it so that you can be confident that the total cost you see in Kubecost Collections is going to be the total spend for that business unit. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Andrew here for a quick demo.
Yeah, thanks, Kai. So today we'll go through the Kubecost platform in regards to collections and talk about grouping within the platform and how you can leverage some of the information that you already have, including labels, annotations, and just even pod names to create groupings and collections within the Kubecost platform. So for those that are familiar with the Kubecost platform, you know that we can actually show you your Kubernetes costs and your cloud costs. Kubecost deploys on your clusters and is able to measure within the cluster the costs per node, per network spend, per load balancer, and break down those clusters into those distinct allocations. We can also plug into your cloud billing and bring in all the costs, whether that's AWS Cur, Azure Cost Export, Google BigQuery, and pull in all those cloud costs. So if you haven't used Kubecost, in a little while, we've become more of a total solution within the last year. Because we pull in the cloud costs and the Kubernetes costs, there are some overlaps where most of the time these Kubernetes nodes are actually running on EC2 instances or running on Azure VMs. Kubecost is automatically figuring that math out for you. So our total cost is 9.87K in the last 7 days. And Kubecost knows that 1.18K is Kubernetes spend. We're going to match up the Kubernetes spend for the node, the disk, the cluster management, the network with those cloud costs. So those are covered. But a lot of people have additional cloud costs that are non-Kubernetes. So when we look at our Cloud Cost Explorer here, this is all my cloud costs for the last 7 days across, in this case, multiple providers. So I'll just switch my aggregation and you can see last 7 days, we've had AWS, GCP, and Azure. And if I look at my Kubernetes utilization, most of this spend is actually going to Kubernetes. So KubeCost has been installed on the clusters running in these accounts, and it knows that 57% of the spend in this AWS account is going towards Kubernetes clusters that we've installed on. But the additional spend that is non-Kubernetes related, we didn't traditionally have a great way to group that with the Kubernetes spend. So a lot of times, even though this Amazon S3 is 0% Kubernetes utilization, because Kubecost doesn't know it's being used by an app running on the cluster. So that's where collections comes into play. Collections will allow me to take this S3 data, this S3 costs $1,400, and I know that my application called Kubecost is the only application that leverages this S3 bucket or this S3 service. So all the costs for that cloud service should also go with the Kubecost namespace or the Kubecost Kubernetes costs. So that's where we created collections. Also, one thing to mention before I go into collections is because we install on the cluster, Kubecost is automatically picking up all of the labels, the annotations, the node labels, although you do have to turn them on in the config. And also on the cloud side, any tags. So because we pull in all of those different pieces of information, we're allowing you to create collections based on not only just services in general. Let me actually jump over to this one. Services in general, but specific tags on those services. So what I'm going to do today in this walkthrough is create a new collection. The collections, if you're on 2.0 or 2.1 or 2.2, you should see them on the left side menu. You can start creating collections, although we do recommend upgrading to 2.2 for the best performance for the latest release on collections. And you can see I have a few already defined. I have cost center A, cost center B, cost center C. So that's a good example of collections being subgroups underneath a broader category. I have cost center as my category, but I'm able to define the cost centers A, B, and C underneath that category. Within the collections module, you have the collection view, which shows all those subgroups, or I can take a step back and look at the category view. That is going to have all of my groups together and give me the cost for all of them combined. So if I switch back into collection, today I'm not going to look at cost center. I'm actually going to create a new collection. And the new collection is going to be in my category, one that I already have. It's going to be under product. And the name is going to be Kubecost. So I have a new product I'm deploying or a new team that I'm going to be accounting for. In this case, it's my Kubecost application. I've gone up, I've changed the name, and I've added the category. And so what happens is by default, I'm looking at the last 7 days of spend across all of the cloud and Kubernetes that I've given Kubecost access to. So if you're on our enterprise plan and you have history, you can go back the last 90 days, last 60 days. But for collections, what's really important is make sure everything running right now has a proper collection. And then going forward, it'll be automatically accounted for. So if we start with the last 7 days, I can see I had $5,000 of spend that right now is not in this grouping for Kubecost. When I click in, now I have ability to look at my 2 different domains. So I have my Kubernetes spend domain and I have my cloud spend domain. These will correspond with the other reports that I have for Kubernetes and cloud costs. So they'll be matching to what we have in the other modules. So when I come into Kubernetes, what it's doing is it's showing me all the namespaces across all the clusters that I've added into my Kubecost setup. So let's just say that I know I have a specific cluster, which is KC demo prod, where everything on this cluster belongs to Kubecost. Right now, I'm aggregating that by namespace. So it's showing me all of the cost of that cluster by specific namespace. But we know everything on this cluster goes in, so I'm going to add all. So now we actually will get some of those costs up in the collection. What we also can do is if I go into cloud, I can start looking at my cloud services. So I can see that, all right, I have Amazon S3, but maybe I want to say, show me anything where the provider ID, contains Kubecost. And I'm able to see all the cloud items that match that pattern. So you're able to come in and really tailor these different rules to figure out, okay, if I have specific accounts in my cloud that belong to a specific application or a team, I can just add that whole account. I should probably just back up my filter here. I can add that whole account to that collection. Let's say that we know this Kubecost one account belongs to the Kubecost application. I'm going to add that in. Now, all of a sudden, my costs and collections are starting to get larger. So as you allocate these rules, you've created a group called Product Kubecost. When I look at my screen here, my last 7 days, my total Kubernetes cost for Kubecost, including the node, the load balancer, the network, has been $54. It also has a cloud cost of over $1,000. So actually, my cloud spend for Kubecost application is a lot more than its direct Kubernetes spend. And when I come in and look at the percentage of Kubernetes spend, I see that it's 44% and 24% of cloud spend. So once you have this group defined, you can start to use it in different areas of the platform, and then we can have more information about, percentages and the assets that this represents. You have an easy way to link to reporting as well. So in my case, I have $56 or $54 of Kubernetes costs, anything for the cluster KC demo prod. When I click this, it'll launch me directly into the filtered KC demo prod allocations report. So the collections become kind of a jumping off point for anything that you want to track and label. And it really helps to bring all your different collections together in a category. So when I come into my application category, you're going to see at the bottom, I have multiple different, actually, let me go to cost center. So if I look at my cost center category, I have all my cost centers below, as well as a total for all of these cost centers together. And these cost centers have a little bit of overlap. So if there was any kind of rules between the different groupings that cover the same costs, we're going to be able to identify that. And then in the future, we'll have ways to actually distribute that and share that. But we make sure that if any groups overlap, it is not double counted for you. This allows you to have kind of a full view of individual cost centers by, all of them next to each other, or by drilling into specific cost centers and getting your specific information. The good thing about collections that we've just added as well is you can export any of the collection information to a CSV or to a PDF. So this can be really handy when potentially you need to create a new collection to track maybe a specific job or experiment that's running that, maybe it's not a fully allocated across all your spend collection, but, it could be even a standalone where it's, experiment A. It's not a category, but it's just a collection group. I could then come in and say, all right, any Kubernetes pods where the pod name contains Kubecost or whatever I wanted to, define by, I can then track and make sure any pods that I spin up now, with that specific label, that specific filter, will be added automatically. So if I'm saying I'm doing an experiment here and track any pod that comes up with Kubecost in the name, as new pods come on, you're actually going to see these costs increase and they'll automatically be tracked. So it really allows you to build these groups once, and then you'll be able to use them all across the platform as we add more features coming up down the line. So the last thing here is you do have ability as you start to build out more and more collections to filter directly to those collections. I can see all of them here. So if I wanted to go to a specific grouping, I could just filter that down, or I could filter by category and see that a little bit, more drilled down. And then you have an ability to just switch here, like I showed before, between the collections and the categories. So some cool things on this that are upcoming is we're going to have the ability to better automatically create collections programmatically. There is some ways that today you can create a JSON in the your Visual Studio Code notepad, create a JSON formatted collection rule group. So it would allow you to actually have collections as code, not just the UI. And we're working on improving that and automatic creation becoming a little easier. And then having these collection groups reflect more across the platform in different areas. So things like being able to do a budget by a collection group or budget by category. We're going to make those a little bit more naturally occurring through the platform. So I would recommend, if you're a current user, get in there and build collections today. Let us know your feedback. And if you build them today, you're only going to get the benefits of that down the line as we add more features around that. So that being said, I'll pause the demo on the collections itself. We'll look at the Q&A, and if anyone has any questions they want to throw in now, feel free to throw in some questions in the chat, and we had some pre-submitted questions as well.
Yeah, I think if you want to go back to the deck, I'll give a deep dive too on what all other features we have on the backlog for collections. So as Andrew's mentioning, programmatic collection creation of collections so that you can create hundreds of these at once, maybe if you have like a lot of teams or a lot of applications. Also going to be adding the ability to create shared collections. Maybe if I want to, if I have some collection with a bunch of just shared infrastructure, maybe it's shared amongst different teams. So allowing teams to really do sharing of costs between collections. Also, we're going to be adding, if you saw the overlap concept that Andrew demoed, we're going to be adding the ability to really dive into that and inspect, which components are overlapping. Also, Andrew touched on this a little bit. We're going to be bringing this collections to other parts of the Kubecost applications. We really see this as becoming a first-class citizen of the app, if you will. So, maybe you want to filter the savings page to a specific collection to see all the savings opportunities associated with a given team or application. Or maybe I want to go to the budgets page and set and enforce a budget for some business unit. And then finally, with our 2.2 release, you may have noticed, for those of you on the latest, that you can now integrate external costs into Kubecost. So we've started off with Datadog. So you can now actually monitor your Datadog costs in Kubecost. We're going to be adding support for other kind of IT applications that teams, want to monitor the cost of and cube costs. So things like Snowflake and Databricks, are also on the roadmap. So these will also be coming to collections. So you can see how collections is going to become like this single source of truth for all of your costs for your various business units. So yes, with that, as Andrew was mentioning, we would love to open it up to your questions. I think we do have a few pre-submitted ones that maybe Dee, you can talk to us about.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Andrew and Kai. So we did get a few pre-submitted questions, so we will start with those. But in the meantime, if you have other questions, please feel free to drop them into the Q&A tool, and we will cover as many as we can as well. So the first question we have is, can I add specific cloud resources like individual S3 buckets and EC2 instances to collections without relying on tags?
Yes, and I think this is actually very similar to Serge in the chat. Just put one in what he's talking about there. You can. So with the cloud items, you have the ability to aggregate by provider ID. So that's actually provider, sorry, resource ID. And this will have the naming conventions for whatever the item is. So you can come in and say, all right, filter to, service S3 with the resource ID contains, XYZ. So, how I would really do that is probably filter to S3 first. So let's see. Somewhere in there, S3. So now I'm in only my S3 costs for the last 7 days. And then if you filter by resource ID, here's all the buckets. So I could say, all right, I have a bunch of buckets named Kubecost, hosted, whatever the hosted is. I could actually come in and filter by label directly and tag on top of that. If you had S3 tags on the bucket for owner or whatever, or I could just say provider ID or resource ID contains, cube cost. And so as you layer these rules, I can then add to the collection, and then any new S3 bucket that I have that has the name matching whatever my rule was will automatically be added to the collection there. So it makes it really easy to like tag individual stuff by tag or by name, however you want to do it, and then get it into the grouping. Hopefully that answers the question.
Awesome, thanks. The next question we have here is, how do you calculate costs within collections to make sure I'm not double paying for resources?
Yeah, so that is tracked, in the kind of the foundation of how collections is built. Like first of all, once I allocate costs in this collection, they're not available for me to be, allocating again in this group. When I go to another group in the category, it knows which specific costs have already been accounted for within that category. So basically, when I create a new collection group in the category, I only have the rest of my allocation costs to then put into those groups. So there's categories that are meant for full allocation. You can think like cost center, product, things where you want to make sure every dollar is tracked to something. And then there's collection groups that maybe are more one-off for specific tasks and reasons, where you might need to get a CSV of cost data for some specific combination of things. So yeah, hopefully that answers the question, and we can follow up more.
I'll just add that under the hood, it kind of leverages the Kubecost reconciliation process, which is the way by which we reconcile the costs of your real-time usage against what you see in the cloud bill. So basically, we look at that asset, and then we're able to see that corresponding line item in your bill, and we're able to like look at those IDs. So it largely lines up with the way we do reconciliation and allocations.
Awesome. The next question we have is, does collections include network spend?
Yes, and so this actually links with Dennis's question, which is also, is there still a way to allocate the idle resources? So right now, idle is the one thing that is not being added for the Kubernetes piece. That will change soon. So, for those who haven't seen it on Kubecost, by default, we show the idle spend on the cluster and we pull that out to its own line item. So, when I'm actually reporting costs by namespace here for Kubecost Nightly, it's not automatically getting its share of the idle. It's only getting what it used or requested. So in the collections today, when I add, namespace Kubecost Nightly, it's only adding $25. It's not adding its idle yet. That 25 does include the network, the volume, the RAM, all that. But soon you'll have an ability to also, so you'll see when I share idle by node, this idle line item up top where it's 159 CPU, 174 RAM will actually be spread into the other groupings. So now each group gets a piece of that. And that will be coming to collections as well. So right now you might have a couple dollars, or depending on how much idle you have, you might see a little bit off between this and collections, but just know that will be matching in an upcoming release.
Absolutely. Yeah. Great question.
Great. It looks like we had one last pre-submitted question here. And if anyone else has questions to submit in the chat, please feel free. We'll try to get to all that we can. Can collections have subcategories, such as Group A having teams A, B, and C?
So today, no. The way to look at it really more is categories have collection groups underneath them. That kind of, will reflect subgroups. And then the goal is that, once we have multiple collection groups under categories, like I'm looking at here, we know which assets correspond to both. So, down the line, you'll be able to, in the allocation report, look at, all right, show me engineering team A by environment staging. And we'll show you the overlapping of the two, more breakdown between that. So again, I would say build your categories and your collection groups. And then as we add it more to the platform, you should be able to do things like, what is my engineering, team A by environment prod, and actually break that down on a more, dimensional reporting, kind of like this reporting is. The idea is to have potentially collections groups show up in these lists. So environment, owner, product, but you'd actually have all your collection groups here to then filter on. And we're actively building that, through the next 6 months.
Awesome. Thanks, Andrew. It looks like that's all the questions we had for today. So I just want to go ahead and thank everyone for joining today. We did get some pre-submitted questions that were not directly related to collections, but we are more than happy to answer any questions you have. So if you submitted a question, we'll follow up with you after this. We did get one question from an anonymous member. So I did want to let everyone know that if you have any questions we didn't get to, you can always email us at team@kubecost.com. And we're more than happy to, just go back and forth with you via email with any questions you have, or set up a deeper dive if you're looking for a more customized demo or walkthrough of our product and features. As I mentioned at the top of the hour, we do have a couple extra webinars coming up this month, or sorry, not this month, this quarter. So our next one is happening on May 9th, and it is called Kubernetes Applications, Best Practices for Cost-Effective Scaling. And then on June 13th, we are hosting FinOps Strategies for Cost Analysis, Understanding and Reducing Your Cloud Bill. So after this call is over, we will send out a recording to this webinar, along with links for the upcoming webinars that you can register for. So again, thank you so much for your time today. We appreciate you, and have a good rest of your day. Thanks, everyone. Bye.